Marianne Williamson, everyone.
Thank you so much. Now, how many of you have been here for yoga classes? How many of you are actually yoga type people? Most of you are just here. You know, sometimes you're driving in a car. Most of us have had this experience, but we're told about these experiences even when we're growing up, learning to drive. And we're told that if the car skids, if you feel yourself going into a skid, that you're going to feel an instinctive desire to put your hands on the wheel and try to control it. But that's what you should not do. You should take your hands off, and you can feel the wisdom of that when you're there. Because you get that nature will right this. But if you put your hands on it, you're actually going to make it worse. Those are dangerous, sort of scary moments. But I've had a couple of them myself, and I know it's true. You just kind of let it go, and nature will correct it. We're living at a time when our country is on skids. And it's very tempting right now for understandable reasons. We're all saying, well, do we control it to the left? Do we control it to the right? Where do we go? What do we do? What do we do? Everybody wants to do something. But there are, on all levels of nature, rules that are the same as on every other level of nature, where you have to let life correct itself. One of the reasons I asked you if you did yoga here is because yoga is an example of an alignment with the laws of nature. And how when you're in alignment with the laws of nature, everything either goes well or corrects itself when things have not gone well. That's true if you're driving a car, it's true with your body, and it's also true with society. Things have not gone well. Things have not gone well because we did not obey the laws of nature. There is such a thing as cause and effect. And all of us know this in our individual lives. If you basically try to treat people well, life tends to work out okay. If you basically try to be a person living in integrity, living according to the dictates of conscience, trying to do right by other people, trying to take responsibility for your own behavior, things do tend to work out. And when you don't, things don't work out. People don't like you. Things go wrong. Chaos ensues. And if you have any level of understanding, if you've been to therapy, if you go to a clergy, if you have friends who love you and help you, people are going to say to you at times like that, you've got to clean up your act if you want this situation to correct itself. That's all that America's going through. This didn't all start with Donald Trump. Sorry, it didn't. Donald Trump is a symptom of the deeper corruption of our society. He's not the cause of it all. He's the natural consequence of it all. He's the embodiment of it all. But it's been going on for 40 years. We made money a false god in America. We turned short-term corporate profits into our god, and our government, we allowed it to happen. And we have countenanced, we have witnessed, and in some ways we have acquiesced to the erosion of our democracy. And we would go on and on about our rights, but I think too little about our responsibilities. We took for granted probably the most important thing on this planet, which is the idea, not that we've ever gotten it perfect. No American ever thinks we've embodied everything we stood for, but at our best, we've done well. And at times throughout our history, when our government was not, there have been generations that stood up and put this country back on track. Abolitionists got rid of slavery. Women suffragettes got women the right to vote. The civil rights movement dismantled segregation. There have been people before us who saw things very, very wrong in this country. And they didn't just whine, and they didn't just complain, and they didn't just get angry. They did something about it. And now we're facing anti-democratic forces. But you know what? Other generations have faced anti-democratic forces, okay? The issue is, let's not be the first generation of Americans to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. And one thing we have to start with is not by thinking that the only problem is Donald Trump. This started 40 years ago. It started 40 years ago with the whole trickle-down economic theory, the whole notion that if all the government did was help major corporations make a lot of money for their stockholders, that corporate principle of short-term profit maximization would become the guiding principle of American civilization. You can't have that and have democracy. That's the problem here. You either have a government of, by, and for the people, or you have a government of, by, and for that huge matrix of corporate profit-making machines. Now, the problem is, because of the money that within 10 to 15 years after that just came upon us like it did, the money that these corporations were able to wield upon our government was such that, for all intents and purposes, we were no longer, and have been not for a while, a government of and for the people. We need to have some honest adult conversations among ourselves. We need to stop acting like kids. You know, this is interesting for me as someone who's had a career for 35 years, talking to people when things have gone wrong. My experience of people is we're not stupid. My experience of people, anyone in this room, I have worked with thousands of people. God forbid you get some terrible news. Your child's addicted and it's heroin. The test results came back and it's cancer. I could say about anybody in this room, you'd be really smart and you'd really listen to everything the doctor was saying or whomever was talking, and you would get rid of all unimportant preoccupations, and you'd really be an intelligent person. So why, when it comes to politics, are we acting so stupid? Why are we pretending things aren't what they really are? Why are we farming out our intelligence to the people who are creating the problem? Why are we looking to the people who created this problem to solve the problem? Why are we allowing ourselves to be played as citizens in ways that we would never in our individual lives allow ourselves to be played? This is not my experience of people. But the political establishment talks to us like we're dumb. Have you noticed that? And we've gotten used to it. We don't guffaw enough. See, I come from a generation where we used to go to protest movements, you know, ban the bomb. Now we're not even supposed to talk about it. They created they militarized space now. Did you see that one the other day? We're gonna have a space force. We're apparently not talking about it. Millions of American children are hungry. You got here in Iowa, you got elementary school students on suicide watch. You've got public school children who go to schools where they have now trauma rooms. You have millions of American children who go to classrooms where there aren't even the adequate school supplies to teach a child to read. And if a child can't learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased. The chances of incarceration are drastically increased. But I'm sorry, we're not supposed to talk about that. We're not going to bring that up at the debates. We're not going to talk about the fact that, yes, we need universal health care, but maybe we should also ask ourselves why so many Americans are sick. Why do we have so much sickness compared to the citizens of other countries of comparable wealth? Why do we have so much more chronic illness? You think it might be because of those contaminants in the water? Think it might be because of those carcinogens in the food? Think it might be because of the toxins in the water? Oh, you're not supposed to talk about that. Food companies might not be happy. Chemical companies, agribusiness might not be happy. Oil and gas might not be happy. Why is it that if we don't take radical action for 7 years, it's not just that we have to take radical action in 7 years for reversing climate change, because if we don't, there might be massive social collapse within 20 years. Shouldn't we ask ourselves, why did it get this bad? Jimmy Carter in 1976 put solar panels on top of the White House. Wore a sweater, remember? Enough with the sweater, we also feel. But enough with the sweater, but he was trying to make a point that he had to put it at 68 degrees because we had to go green. And the first thing Ronald Reagan did was he took down the solar panel. This has all been coming, everyone. This has all been coming. And now, what we're supposed to do is, instead of saying, okay, we got to put this on the table, we got to talk about this. Instead, we're not supposed to talk about We're not supposed to talk about millions of chronically traumatized children. We're not supposed to talk about the fact that millions of American children have severe PTSD. We're not supposed to talk about the fact that we have a national security agenda that's based more on endless preparation for war than in any kind of an agenda to create peace on this planet. We're not supposed to be thinking, I guess, about our grandkids or our great-grandkids. I want to ask you a question. How many people in this room have heard a young person over the last few months or last year? How many of you have either been a young person or have heard a young person say, I don't think I'm going to have kids. I don't think I'm going to have kids because I just can't see it. I can't see it. How many of you? Raise your hand. Do you realize how abnormal this is? Do you realize how abnormal this is? We are like frogs in boiling water. And it's just getting hotter and hotter and hotter. That's not the way it's supposed to be. It's one thing if young people say, I'm not into kids. That's just fine. And it's fine every once in a while. I know you used to hear vegans say it, because the vegans have had to think about it for a while. But this is like just regular people who under normal circumstances would love to have children. We're the richest country in the world. At what point do the people rise up and say, this has just got to stop? Something is fundamentally wrong here.
Yep.
Now, the founders of this country, it's very interesting about the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence. What I found in my life is, I'm a student of religion and spirituality. There are some books. The Bible is an example. All the great spiritual source materials. And the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are this way also. You can't outgrow them. The smarter you get, the deeper you get, the smarter and deeper they get. It's just like you get, wow, this is so big. When the founders said there's only one place that's a safe repository of power. You know where they said that is? In the hands of the people. They didn't say in the hands of the DNC. They didn't say it in the hands of the government. They said in the hands of the people. But we have it's learned powerlessness.
Yeah.
The whole country is like when I counsel women who have been beaten by their husbands, and they're just like, why don't you get up and say something? And they've just gotten in the habit of not saying anything. The whole country's like that. We've been trained to ask for too little and to expect for too little and to farm out our intelligence. We farmed it out. Oh, we're hoping they're handling it. Oh, they've handled it. Oh, they're really. And now we're supposed to think those people who have handled it so well that we are what we are the only people we should consider qualified to lead us out of the ditch that system led us into. Now, in saying that, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm not talking about the individual candidates, for instance, running for this office, because some of them are very lovely people. It's about the system itself that has become so corrupt. It is the system itself. And like I said, it did not become corrupt when Trump became president. Trump is the embodiment of the corruption, but Trump's presidency, from a psychological perspective, became inevitable the day we began acquiescing to the idea that somehow the businessman is God. As soon as we acquiesce to that, not the teacher, not the artist, not the philosopher, not the businessman, as soon as we acquiesce to that, the most perverted, twisted version of one, it was inevitable, would rise up to be in our face. You might call that wacky. Some people call it psychology. So we are where we are. And I believe that it's one of those things like the skidding car. You've got to take your hands off the wheel. You've got to pull back a little bit and right yourself with nature. And that's why I asked how many of you actually came to yoga. That's one of the reasons why I enjoy speaking in yoga studios. I enjoy speaking in churches. I enjoy speaking in universities. I enjoy speaking in places where the basic conversation isn't the normal political speak that somehow doesn't get to the heart of the matter. We have to recognize, I believe, the deep human suffering. The deep human suffering that has resulted from an amoral economic system becoming the guiding principle of our society. Now, please note, I did not say an immoral economic system. It's not an immoral economic system, it is an amoral economic system, and there's a big difference here. We're not talking about people who wake up in the morning and say, how can we hurt a child? How can we withhold benefits from a hurting child? How can we hurt the planet? How can we hurt indigenous tribes? That's not what it is. It's people who wake up in the morning and don't believe that they have a moral responsibility to think about those things one way or the other. And that's a very, very interesting lesson for all of us, because there is no moral neutrality. So if you have an amoral economic system where people have bought into the idea that all that a corporation has to worry about is short-term profits for its own stockholders, completely untethered to any kind of ethical or moral consideration. What has happened historically in this country is government has been there to advocate for the people against any overreach by those capitalist forces. That's why we have unions. That's why we have child labor laws. That's why child labor laws and antitrust laws exist, because people stood up and said, stop right there. And I'm not anti-capitalist. I consider myself a capitalist. This was a virulent strain of capitalism, however. It's a virulent strain of capitalism because it's capitalism without a conscience at all. Right. And it justifies having no ethics and no conscience. But what happened, and like I said, we need to be adults here. What happened was that 10 or 15 years after all of this craziness began in the 1980s, some of us are old enough to remember, the money that was then exploded onto the scene in Washington became so great, and then the Democrats felt that in order to keep up, they had to play along too, Democratic Leadership Council, etc., so that both parties became corrupted about it so much. So the one major political party became overwhelmed by forces that would look at the terrible damage done to people's lives because of this, and they would go, yeah, whatever. And too many forces within the other major political party would look at it and go, oh, I know, it's just terrible. And even to this day, will do things to try to treat the pain on the periphery, but will also not challenge the underlying forces that make all the pain inevitable, because they take the money too. So that at this point, we're not a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Can we get real here? If any of you came to me for counseling, you'd know by the time you came to me, you've already talked to the accountant, you've already talked to the lawyer, you've already talked to the doctor, and you're not going to come talk to Marianne Williamson, and you're just going to say, okay, well, let's get real. What do you do? That's kind of like the world I've lived in for 35 years, and what I've learned from working with thousands of people in those situations is people are smart. And people want somebody to help them see what's really true, because they know if they don't see what's really true, they're not going to be able to change things. That's not my experience, that people at that moment get stupid. My experience is when people really know stuff, they're happy to have somebody walk through what's really happening. And that's what we're going to have to do in this country. We are not a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Hundreds of thousands, 600,000 people died in the Civil War. And just to give you a sense of that, 257,000 American soldiers died in World War II. 600,000 people died in the Civil War. So on the battlefield at Gettysburg, when Lincoln wrote that those men had given what he called the last full measure of devotion, so that a government of the people and by the people and for the people would not perish from the earth. So I'm saying to you, as my fellow American, it's perishing. And it's perishing on our watch. It is a government of, by, and for a few of the people. It is a government of major multinational corporations, by major multinational corporations, and for major multinational corporations. There is a corporate aristocracy that runs this country. The undue influence of the money that is exerted by these corporate forces, Big pharmaceutical companies lobbied Washington last year to the tune of $284 million. Oil and gas last year lobbied our government to the tune of $125 million. You think these people don't get anything for that?
Right.
So oil and gas, we gave corporate subsidies, $26 billion last year alone to oil and gas. We have Americans who are dying because they can't afford their insulin, but the United States government surrendered to big pharmaceutical companies the right to negotiate for lower drug prices. We have a national security agenda. Now, I'm a fan of the U.S. military. My father fought in World War II. My critique here is not of the military. The problem is not military decisions. I'm talking about political decisions, and this is an important distinction. U.S. military, I believe, should get every dollar that is needed, that they say they need to keep us safe. That's not the question here. The question here is that over and above what the military says they need, is hundreds of billions of dollars that defense contractors want to increase their own short-term profit.
Right.
The fact we don't have reasonable gun safety laws has nothing to do with the Second Amendment.
Right.
It has everything to do with profits for gun manufacturers. The reason we don't have universal health care already is because Obamacare was as far as the health insurance companies would allow him to go.
Right.
I mean, at what point are we going to just kind of say what we all know? It's kind of interesting. I feel at this point in my career, everything I'm saying in this campaign, I feel very similar to everything I've done in my career. I'm saying everything everybody I know is saying. I'm just saying it when the microphone is on. Because everybody I know. What about the fact that I asked you a few minutes ago, how many of you know people who said they're not having children? Well, why do you think it is that on the debate stage they're not talking about suffering children? I'll tell you why. Because the despair of those children has simply been normalized by the political establishment. This is the big social justice issue. And these children are citizens of the United States, even those who aren't. But they can't advocate for themselves. They can't protest. Where is the American woman? Where is the American woman? Why are we saying first you feed the babies? How bad does this have to get? How bad does this have to get? But these children, they're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. They're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. And then also politicians, notice how they go on and on about the middle class. Isn't that interesting? They always talk about the hardworking middle class. What about the millions of Americans who wish they could call themselves middle class? And so most of these kids are the children of people who they assume aren't going to vote anyway. So it's like they don't exist. Have you noticed how much human suffering is just invisible? And I have to tell you, as far as these children are concerned, I have been to Florida. I've been down to Homestead. I am as concerned about these children in cages as much as anybody is. And I've talked about it as much as anybody. But I'd like to remind you that there are millions of these kids in America who basically live in, the neighborhoods they live in are cages. And these are what in aid work is called silent emergencies versus screaming emergencies. And so we keep expecting that somehow the system's going to change. The system's not going to change. A political status quo does not disrupt itself. A political status quo perpetuates itself. See, this is the thing. You and I might say, oh, it's not working. It's working fine. It's who it's working for. We have an aristocracy. We have reverted to an aristocracy. And I think that's important that we call it an aristocracy. A lot of people call it an oligarchy or plutocracy. The point is, the reason I like the word aristocracy is because it reminds us that's what we said no to in 1776. We said no! We repudiated that in 1776, the idea that only a few people get to win. That's all that an aristocracy is. So we have a situation now where 1% of the people, because it's been going on for 40 years, tax cut after tax cut, corporate subsidy after corporate subsidy, deregulation after deregulation, banking law after banking law. We have had such a massive transfer of wealth into the hands of 1% of our people that only a few people can easily afford health care. Only a few people can easily afford a good education. Only a few people. We have 93 million people who live in chronic, listen, if you have near poverty, what does near poverty translate into in human terms? We are human beings. We are not economic beings. We are human beings. We need to move from an economic to a humanitarian bottom line. We are human beings. 93 million people living near poverty means 93 million people who live on a daily basis, not knowing what will happen if their kids get sick or if they get sick, not knowing how they will send their kids to college, knowing therefore that they're not sure they can really help their kids have a better future, and not knowing how they will get out from under these college loans. And then the same system which created the policies that created what I just described to you, we're now asking them, what are you going to do about the mental health crisis? The mental health crisis? Everything with these people is talking symptoms, nobody talking cause. Can we talk about the mental health crisis? How, given everything I've described to you, could there not be rampant anxiety? Could there not be rampant tension? And could there not be rampant depression? So I'll tell you what I say to the politicians and everybody else is saying, do something about the mental health crisis. You know what I say? Hey guys, why don't you stop driving everybody crazy? These people work for us. Why are we treating that they work? They're your employees. They are your employees. Yep. And you check in, what kind of business runs? You check in with them every 2 years or every 4 years. And then what really kills me, the only people who have a sense of healthy rambunctiousness about this, the only people who seem these days to have even remembered that they work for us, are on the far right. The only place you see any rambunctiousness these days is like in Trump supporters. That's one thing you got to give some of those people. It's like you might disagree with them about everything, and I certainly do, but they do have a kind of healthy sense of, hell no, we're not going to take it. This acquiescence and complacency and going along, it's like there's nothing healthy about this. There's nothing healthy or spiritual, about just kind of being okay with it. This is not a moment that's okay. So there's nothing healthy about pretending like it is okay. And there's nothing negative about yelling fire if in fact the house is burning down. So this is what we need, I believe. We need a president who says, this shit stops now.
Yeah.
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 We need to repeal the 2017 $2 trillion tax cut, which just in this last week.
Yes.
No, it's not even paying for itself, much less any kind of an economic stimulus. It's not even paying for itself. 83 cents of every dollar in this $2 trillion tax cut, and that's why Trump was there. So then in 2017, the GOP could pass that tax cut. 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest individuals and corporations. We should repeal it, although we should put back in the middle class part, because I think the middle class tax cut was a good idea and should have been done before. We need to stop these corporate subsidies. Like $26 billion to oil and gas last year. Can somebody please explain that to me? Because I'm sorry, I thought the planet was like in big trouble. And they're already making billions of dollars. Can you tell me with 13 million hungry children in America, and with 100,000 homeless children in America, and with so many millions of Americans having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to put food on the table, while we're giving oil and gas $26 billion? Because they own Washington, that's why. We need to make it so that the United States government can negotiate for lower drug prices with big pharmaceutical companies, which now own them, the Democratic Party, as well as the Republican Party, which is why you cannot say anything questioning big pharma without them coming at you. Trust me, I know. And we need to say to the military how much you need, guys, and every dollar they say they need, they should get, and all the hundreds of billions of dollars on top of that, that is just for defense. Let me tell you what's happening. So there are these 3 main companies that are defense contractors: Boeing, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman. So the other day when, I'm sorry to say, a democratically led House of Representatives passed that bill the other day, which established the Space Force.
Yeah.
Those guys at Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Boeing, let me tell you what they did. They took out their champagne bottles. They took out the champagne. They took out their champagne glasses. tip their glasses to each other and they giggled. Let them have their little elections.
Yeah.
Even Trump's done it. You know, every once in a while, like most mentally ill people, he says something startlingly true. And he said himself one day, he said, well, you know, the military-industrial complex runs this place.
He did say that, yeah.
He did, he said, it's insane, right? Okay, so they don't care because they know that you think that was raised on the debate stage. Did anybody say, well, this week we passed a Space Force, look at the military. So anybody that like makes love in the grass, like looking up at the stars, you might want to think about that from now on. You don't know what's pouring down at you. Like, given thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, people looking up in the sky at the stars. If we're going to now know, I mean, they've been doing stuff up there, and we know that, and some of it might not even be the worst thing, I mean, other countries. But establishing an actual militarization space force, I mean, that means the level of money that's going to be put into this, level of, it's beyond. It's going to be like the Air Force, it's going to be like the Navy, it's going to be like the Army. So this is what questions you. Shouldn't we be discussing this?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we, like, just, I don't know, have a conversation about it? We're Stepford citizens. You know, when I was younger, we were Stepford wives. We're just Stepford citizens. We don't talk about what they say we should talk about. We need a real healthy blast of hell no. That's what this country was born of. You know how many people were massacred at the Boston Massacre? 12. I mean, you know, one taxation without representation, and they threw 342 chests of tea into the water. Hell no! That's what the American Revolution was. Hell no! That's what abolition was. That's what women's suffrage was. That's what civil rights was. It was people who said no. Sometimes no is very healthy. Love sometimes says no. That's why I love when everybody says, oh, she's just a love candidate. She's not talking about anything serious. I wonder why they said that. Because I'm talking about the most serious. That's why they said it. To make sure you wouldn't listen.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
I believe we need a Department of Children and Youth. What we need to do is we need to go back to our moral center. We need to recognize all the unbelievably egregious immorality, and that has to do with human suffering that we are responsible for because we are human beings. The first thing, our children. We need a United States Department of Children and Youth. The vulnerabilities and the challenges of our children are way beyond anything that can be absorbed by our current structures, such as the Department of Education and Health and Human Services. We need a radical infusion, a massive infusion, a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. We need to stop the immoral way that we base our educational funding primarily on property taxes. Because that is so wrong. It means a poor child is not going to get a quality education. Now, let me tell you what some people would say. Oh, Miss Williamson, she just doesn't understand economics. Okay, so let's talk economics, shall we? If you want to talk about the entrepreneurial genius of this country, if you want to talk about where, okay, because this is our job. Let's imagine, because this is our job. No person of moral stature lives only for themselves. And no generation of moral stature lives only for ourselves. We have a responsibility to think about something other than right here. We should be thinking about what this country is going to be 25 years from now. We should be thinking about what this country is going to be 50 years from now. We should be thinking about our great-grandchildren. That's what serious adults do. So I'll tell you where the amazing prosperity and peace of American society is going to come from in the 21st century. I'll tell you where it lies. It doesn't lie in the sun, and it doesn't lie in the wind, and it doesn't lie under the ground. It lies in the brain of every American kindergartner. If we want money, prosperity, and peace in 20 years from now, what we would do is take better care of our 10-year-olds today. Every time there is a small child whose intellectual and cultural and moral education we are ignoring. We are leaving money on the table. And it's all before the years of 8 years old. It's all before 8 years old. It's all before 8 years old. That's what we know now. It's all before 8 years old. Not only that, in countries such as China, who have a sense of long-term economic planning, that's what they're doing. They're front-ending it. Have you seen Chinese children? Have you seen even Russian children? They are all over ours. Why are they getting a better education than ours are? Now, this is not in any way a criticism of the American public education system. Our public school teachers are heroes. Just like we are in the habit of looking at military personnel and saying thank you for your service, every time you meet a public school teacher, you should say thank you for your service.
That's right.
We need community wraparound services, we need trauma-informed education, we need restorative justice, we need conflict resolution, we need mental health care services. Can you imagine? So let me ask you a question. Somebody raise your hand, tell me where you work. Where do you work? Yeah, what kind of business?
Possibility.
Okay, well tell me, who works, where do you work?
Self-employed.
Self-employed, where do you work?
At a hospital.
At a hospital. Okay. Now, there have been actually some terrible things that have happened in hospitals. But in general, there's not an established pattern of mass shootings at hospitals. Now, if there was an established pattern of mass shootings at hospitals, wouldn't that sort of psychologically and emotionally affect you every day that you went to work? And now imagine being 12 years old.
Nothing.
Are we even talking about this? Are we, excuse me, are we even talking about this? So we're not getting real. We talk about symptoms. And politics is all about treating, it's like something out of the 20th century. This is the 21st century. And no solutions, the solution is in a moral place, it's in an inner place. It's dealing with these moral issues. The second has to do with our war and peace. Our entire national security agenda has to do with constant preparation for war. $760 billion in military budget, $40 billion in State Department, which is diplomacy and development, mediation, $17 billion on humanitarian assistance and long-term development, $1 billion on peace building. Now, let me ask you a question. You work in a hospital. Don't we kind of get now that you can't just take medicine, you also have to cultivate your health? We kind of get that now. We get that sickness is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of sickness. But war is the absence of peace. Peace isn't the absence of war. So you can't just prepare for war, you should also wage peace.
Wage peace.
There are 4 factors which statistically mean when these factors are present, there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. Number 1, expanded educational opportunities for children. Number 2, expanded economic opportunities for women. Number 3, reduction of violence against women. And number 4, just the amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. Where people are not so desperate, there's going to be more peace. Where people are desperate, people are going to do desperate things. Large groups of desperate people should be seen as a national security risk because they are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. This could be a corner of an American city with gangs, or it could be a corner of the world with terrorist organizations. But there's no corporate profits in peace building, there's corporate profits in war making. Just like there's not that much corporate profits in making us healthier, there's only corporate profits in dealing with sickness.
Right.
And that's why I want a Department of Peace. We should have a Department of Peace as well as a Department of Defense. That's why we should have a peace academy as well as a military academy. That's why the peace builders that already work in our government, in State Department, etc., should be given equal weight in conversation. Right now, this is how the national security agenda works. So the president meets with all, you see all these people, the very serious people, right? And what you've got is the military people, and they should be in the room. And then you've got all these, military contractors, they're in the room. And then the peace builders are kind of out in the anteroom. And they're, treating a very patronizing way. And so basically our system says, well, we'll call you in when we need you. If I were president, it would be very different. What it would be is the military would be in the room and the peace builders would be in the room and the military contractors would be outside, and I'd say, we'll call you in when we need you. We're going to tell you what we need to create a more peaceful world. We're not going to let you tell us what you need, because if you don't get what you need, you're going to put so much money into candidates that will defeat people in my party that I will not be able to do it. That's how corrupt it is. Meanwhile, JFK said, if mankind does not end war, war will end mankind. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to just keep preparing for war and hope that it just kind of will back up into peace one day? We have young generations now. They don't even remember a time when America wasn't at war. So it's been normalized. We've got too many young people. They don't even remember a time. We like, oh, we had a war, or the Vietnam War, and we fought the Vietnam War. I mean, people don't, so much of this has just become normal. And we're like frogs, and the water's getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. And my healthcare plan, my whole health plan, and we can't just talk about universal health care. We must have universal health care. My plan does have that. But we have to ask why we're so sick. And we have to recognize that there are dietary changes and lifestyle changes that are proven in case after case after case to be equally efficacious, equally ameliorative to the treatment and even the reversal of disease as certain pharmaceutical and surgical options. And those should be given to every patient, and insurance should have to pay for them. These are the kinds of fundamental changes that need to happen in America. And that's why I'm running for president. I'm running for president because these kinds of fundamental changes, where we address root causes and not just symptoms. This is why I talk about race, why I say we have to get deep and get real. We need to clear up and clean up some historical debts and just deal with it. Be the generation that deals with it. Go on and pay reparations. We act like it's such a big deal. Other countries, it's not such a big deal. Germany paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations. Why? Because this is what you do. By the 20th century, people knew that. And it doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. By the way, it's been established that black families in America made as much money as white families, that we'd have a $1.5 trillion larger economy. Mm-hmm. So we're giving $2 trillion to the very, very richest, like that's some economic stimulus when we know it's not. I'm suggesting $500 billion spent over 20 years in educational and economic renewal for black families, which that would be a stimulus on the economy. Mm-hmm. It's just for a nation, it's like for an individual. You have a debt to pay, you did something wrong, clean it up, instead of passing this toxic and obviously, but this you would get with any, just make sure it's a Democrat, and make sure it's a progressive Democrat. If you don't caucus for me, caucus for progressive Democrat, to make sure that it's someone who realizes we need to take radical action for climate change over the next 7 years. Because if we do not, we could have a level of mass social collapse over 20 years, unlike anything we have seen in the modern era. This is not as simple as just defeating Donald Trump. This is not as simple as just not going over the cliff. We have to get out of the vicinity of the cliff. If all we do is defeat Donald Trump, but don't move into these deeper root causes, then it's like any other symptom. It'll just morph into another symptom. Those same forces, they don't care if it's not Donald Trump. There's so many lined up behind him. They'll be back in the midterms in 22. They'll be back in 24. We have to look at the deeper level of corruption that gave birth to all this. And as far as defeating Donald Trump, he's not just a politician. He's a phenomenon, and he's a cult leader, and he is dealing on a level of psychological and emotional, non-linear techniques. And traditional political linear strategy left over from the 20th century, he'll chew it up and spit it out. He's amazing with his lies. I'll tell you how to defeat Donald Trump. Be amazing with your truth-telling.
Right.
He says things that make you go, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that. You know who's the person to run up against him? Someone about whom they'd say, oh, I can't believe she just said that. Yeah, with him, you can't believe it because it's such a lie. And with the person you go up against me, you can't believe it because it's so deeply true and we all know it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I believe. But don't kid yourself, because the corporatist forces are headquartered in the Democratic Party as in the Republican Party. Not nearly as bad, because I remember, listen, I grew up with the Democratic Party of Bobby Kennedy. I grew up with the Democratic Party, which there was no doubt they were on the side of the people. And this money thing has corrupted both parties to such an extent. It's time for the people to step in. And we have been, and to see Iowa voters, I just want to finish and then talk to you about whatever you'd like to talk about. This whole canard about narrowing the choices, that's supposed to be your job. That's what the primaries are for. The only people who are supposed to be narrowing the choices are the people of Iowa, Nevada, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. That's what primaries are for. So this whole reality TV show of the debates, who's in the debates? Last time they did it, it had to be Hillary. Listen, for those of you who are Democrats, and I'm not the first person to say this, if the DNC had kept their fingers off the scale last time, it would have been Hillary, it would have been Bernie, but I believe we would have all felt good about it, and I don't think Trump would be president today. They're doing the same thing now. They're doing the same thing now. They made sure it was only one of their, it's like, you know what it is? It's the equivalent of the old days with the cigar smoking bosses figuring out who the candidates can be. I know, I've been in the belly of this beast. I know how it works. And if you look much at my candidacy, you saw how it worked. We can't have her. After that second debate, we let her on a third time. She might gain some traction. Kill her now. Character assassination, she's crazy. She's dangerous. Yeah, dangerous to you guys. She's anti-science, she's anti-medicine. And for whatever it's worth, no one who has attended my talks, no one who's ever read my books, has ever heard me utter a word that's anti-medicine, anti-science, telling people that their lovelessness caused their disease. Things that are trashing. This is bigger than my candidacy from a 35-year career. So they can make a joke about a woman, crystal lady, wacko. I would just like to say, I'm an American woman, and I'm not a joke. We have a situation on our hands now where, in my opinion, it's very, very important that we defeat Donald Trump next year. But we need an awakening that goes beyond just defeating Donald Trump. We need to make citizenship, and a much more aware, awake level of citizenship, an aspect of a well-lived life. And we should probably take responsibility for the fact that we let it ever be different is what got us this way. So this whole thing of the debates, and then what happens with the debates, they're going to narrow the field. I heard somebody say, I said something like, well, why do you need the Democratic Party to narrow the field? And somebody said, well, you know, it's like with children, you can't give them too many choices. And I said, that says it all, because the voters of the United are not children. The voters of Iowa are not children. The voters of New Hampshire are not children. You could have handled this perfectly. And the airwaves belong to the American people. That's all that should have happened here. Every serious candidate, there were 20 of us, should have been given equal time. That's it. We're the way we are right now, we're on our way to a time when you're going to have to be a billionaire to run for president. What does that tell you? And then what happened is, well, you're on the, I remember, first of all, you're not on the, because they make it so that you have to have the polls. Of course, these are so opaque. Who are they polling?
Right.
And all that. And then and the thing that really does end someone who couldn't be on the debate stage is that then all these other people who are doing forums, LGBTQ forum, or J Street forum, or a CNN forum, or a forum about climate, they say, well, we're not having you because you're not on the debate stage.
Right.
So it just creates this narrative that you're out. And then everybody says you're unelectable. Well, it all is the narrative, and then all these people think of themselves as so smart, so easily bamboozled, think of themselves as so smart. It's really quite something. And I'll tell you something, I'm a lefty. I'm a Democrat, I'm a lefty. But anybody who thinks that on the left they don't practice the politics of personal destruction, oh, yes they do. Yes they do. And so we have a lot of cleaning up to do about our system. A lot of cleaning up to do about our system. And 4 years from now, it will all start over again. I have great hope that the Democrat will win, and I will certainly be doing everything I can to support the Democratic nominee, whoever the Democratic nominee is. And I will tell you, I have seen this from the inside. I have seen this now from the inside. And the only people who can stop this are the American people. And you are the vanguard. You're it. You're the first line of defense. You're the first line of defense. And it's made me very sad. You know, one of the things that I have seen that's been very impressive, I find the voters in Iowa very impressive, and I feel the same thing in New Hampshire. You know how important your decision is. You know how consequential your decision is. And that's part of why I feel what I feel. You are more than capable of handling this. You are more than capable of handling this. And when I've seen Iowans or New Hampshireites going, well, the DNC says, what is this? You know, it's funny because the Republicans don't defer to the RNC the way the Democrats defer to the DNC. Isn't that odd? They just say, oh, they're just our administrative guys. But this whole thing created by the DNC about who you're supposed to consider viable. So I believe that this whole primary scene, this whole electoral scene that we have, what you and I are doing right here, this is so profound. You know that in most countries they could not do what we're doing? There are countries in this world where I, particularly as a woman, there are countries in this world where if I were saying a fraction of what I have said to you today, I would be hauled off, I would be tortured, and possibly worse. So I do not take this for granted, and I just feel very privileged to be able to have this conversation with you. I feel so honored. I do not take it for granted that I get to tell you exactly what I think. But I believe that we're living in a time when the American people better start saying exactly what we think. And if we do start saying exactly what we think, and we do start realizing that where there is a sufferer, see, I come from an era of spirituality, where the whole goal is to reduce human suffering. And you know what I realize now about politics? That should be the goal of politics too. Reduce unnecessary human suffering. Unleash the spirit of the American people. That's why we should have universal health care. That's why we should have free college tuition. That's why we should get rid of these college loans. That's how you'll make money. Unleash people's dreams. Uncap people's dreams. Let people soar. And then your economy will be fine. Money doesn't come from a bunch of corporate aristocrats up on Mount Olympus somewhere who are dropping crumbs from their table in the form of job creation. Maybe they'll get you a job. Maybe they'll create you a job. Maybe they'll create you a job. It's so paternalistic. That is not the healthy attitude of the American citizen. Oh, please, corporate chieftain, would you please create me a job? I think the healthier attitude of the American citizen should be this to our government. Give me free health care. Give me a good education, and give me a fair shot. I'll create my own damn thing. This is your money. These are your tax dollars. That's why you should have free health care, and that's why you should have free education, and that's why you should not have these college loans. Go live your life and soar, and everybody will be better off. But the rugged individualism that is such a strength of the American society, rugged individualism has too often become rugged narcissism over the last few decades. We have to be both. We have to be, I'm doing whatever I want, and you're okay, right? It's gotta be both and. It's gotta be, I'm soaring and you're okay, right, because we're in this together. We have to get back to our first principles. And when we do that, we will be okay. And I just want to close by pointing out that Winston Churchill said that Americans can be counted on to do the right thing after we've exhausted every other option. So I think we've exhausted every other option. And every country in the world, there are a lot of people in this world right now who are rolling their eyes about us. They cannot believe we allowed this to happen. But those people also know the world will not be better if America goes down. And those people also know that historically, even though it's true, sometimes we get there late, we slam it like nobody's business once we do. It's time to slam it now. Thank you.
Will this be on YouTube or something? Because my two kids are in Iowa and they're adults. And I want my daughter-in-law to see what you just said.
Good, thank you.
Pottawattamie
We didn't tape this one, but apparently somebody is.
Pottawattamie County Democrats, we tape and live stream all of our candidates that come to within the borders of our county.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
She has a lot of videos on Marianne2020.com that are
Yes.
really easy.
Please go to my website, Marianne2020.com. Please sign up on my mailing list. Please look at my videos, etc., and send them out, etc. Anybody have any questions for me? Any questions or comments before any questions about issues? Yes.
Well, it just hit me pretty hard when you were talking about the truth. Why are we afraid the truth won't win?
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Why are we afraid that truth will not win the election?
Truth will win. This is the deal. Truth will always win. Love will always win. God's will has never not been done, is what he said. The issue is how much suffering has to happen first. And that's true of the whole human race. This planet's going to be okay and this country's going to be okay. The issue is how much human suffering we're going to bring upon ourselves before. And that is our choice. You know, I read once where it's not up to you what you learn, it's merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. America's going to learn the lessons. The issue is, are we going to learn it through wisdom and intelligence, or are we going to learn it through pain? Right now, I believe the reason that so many people are concerned that Trump will win again is because people can feel. We're not getting down. We're not getting down. You know, 2 years ago, the emotional tenor of the moment was rage. I believe now the emotional tenor of the moment is exhaustion. And I don't believe a candidate coming out swinging against Trump, I don't feel that's the best thing for this moment. The people, you know, I heard one of the candidates on a TV ad saying, I'm going to prove he is a fraud and a liar. And I thought to myself, to who? Who doesn't know? Everybody knows. Some people don't care because they like what he's doing, right? But everybody gets that. So the people who are going to vote for Trump are going to vote for Trump. I mean, don't even think about it again. They love Trump. They have a right to vote for Trump. They're going to vote for Trump. There are other people who are appalled by his agenda, and they're going to vote for the Democrat no matter what. So you don't have to prove anything to them. They're going to vote for the Democrat. That's not, but the point is, for those of us who are Democrats, is that the number of the people who absolutely love Trump and the number of people who absolutely appall his agenda are too close for comfort. So what we have to reach are the millions of people who didn't vote last time, and also the millions of people, I feel very strongly about this. There's some wonderful people who voted for Trump, and they are disturbed. But if all we do is go on and on about how terrible Trump is, that's scolding them, that's shaming them. That will not make them want to vote for the Democrat. So we have to talk about something beyond just bashing Trump. We have to talk about the deeper issues and about what's possible for this country and what it will take to repair this country, such as a Department of Peace, such as a Department of Children and Youth, such as a healthcare system that actually helps us be healthier, such as healing our planet, such as creating genuine genuine economic justice and unleashing the spirit of the American people, such as dealing with real race issues, make him irrelevant. Does that make sense? And I think that that's why other people can feel like, otherwise, who are you talking to? Who are you talking to with just bashing Trump? Because the people that you're who are you talking to?
Well, you're not.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
the other thing that I think that is, like you said, is relevant, I'm a teacher, I'm also a healthcare worker, and the kids from Florida that said, no, we're not taking this after that mass shooting, so our job, our generation's responsibility to educate that generation. They're gonna be the ones who need the education that you just gave all of us tonight, because they will talk. Like you said, our generation was brought to not question healthcare, not question people in higher power, and Big Pharma is, I'm a special ed teacher, Big Pharma is sticking labels on these kiddos so then they can be medicated and they don't get any of the
You better
root cause.
believe it. You better believe it. And all of you who are empowered in the Democratic Party, I hope you will hear that.
Yeah.
And you know what? You want to hear something true, and every Democratic official needs to know this? Do you know one of the biggest things that stands to lose Democrats to vote to Republicans is that in this weird way, there are people who feel they have more listening for that among Republicans than among Democrats.
Say that again?
Yes.
Because there is the sense, whether totally true or not, that there's a sense many people have that the Republican Party is less bought and sold by Big Pharma than Democratic parties. They're both bought and sold by
Personal
Democrat,
medical
but
freedom.
But you get a weird sense among Republicans that you can question it more. How ironic. And bad news for us. Bad news for us. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am. I wish I could in any way disagree with you. It's really a big deal. And I know the way I was ambushed by Anderson Cooper on his show for this. Well, his show is sponsored by a big pharmaceutical company. So, as far as the young people, one of the things I have, and I hope that you will look at my issues page on Marianne2020.com, I think we should lower the voting age to 17. These kids are, I wouldn't even have a problem with them with 16, but let's start with 17. These kids, it's their future. They're the ones dealing, I think that's one of the ways to deal with the NRA issue. I don't know why I'm looking at you specifically on that. But when you say we need to educate them, I think they need to educate us. Because a lot of these young ones are very hip to what's happening.
Well, 2020, clearer vision for the truth.
Right. That's how. Yes, sir.
You know, one of the things that's real specific about your platform versus other people is this idea of the Department of Peace. Can you talk a little bit about how you envision what that department would do in the world?
Thank you for giving me that opportunity. I would love to. One of my favorite topics. Well, first of all, so Department of Peace would have a domestic and an international. Now, there are peace-building skills. I think a lot of people don't realize that there are specific peace-building skills that take just as much expertise, and in some of the places where these skills are practiced, just as much courage as military skills. And I mentioned to you the four main factors: expanding economic opportunities for women, expanding educational opportunities for children, reducing violence against women, and ameliorating unnecessary human suffering. Now, in some cases, because I mentioned a peace-building academy. In some cases, the skill is the same, whether you're talking about it internationally or domestically, whether you're talking about Somalia or whether you're talking about it inner city of the United States. In some areas, it's different. East LA is different than a Congo, let's say. So some of them, and it's very specific. But there are people already in our State Department. There are people here in Iowa and in every state. See, this is one of the things. When it comes to the children, and I've seen this in Iowa just like I've seen it in every state, you have what you need here. You have the social workers, you have the teachers, you have the mental health care experts, you have the early childhood experts, you have what you would need to deal with the children. You have the peace builders here. You have the people who know what to do with the formerly are incarcerated. You have people who know what to do with at-risk youth. You have people here who know how to do conflict resolution, who know how to do restorative justice, who know how to do anti-bullying, who know how to do trauma-informed education, who know how to do violence prevention. Just like you have people here with your floods, et cetera, in Cedar Rapids, like in every state. We have the environmentalists who know what to do about wildfires in California. You have the environmentalists who know what to do about floods and flood preparation here. You have the environmentalists who know what to do about hurricanes in South Carolina. The problem we have is we have a government that funds the problem creators. It does not fund the problem solvers. So when you talk about a peace department, these people already exist. These people exist in the government, in the State Department, they exist, and they exist all over in nonprofit organizations. The reason I want a Department of Peace is to coordinate, to bring them together. Our infrastructures, our governmental infrastructures are very 20th century. They answer to a 20th century modality of problem solving. It's all symptom. Meanwhile, American society has moved forward. American society, we're fine. The American people are not the problem. That's what's so tragic here, or potentially tragic. If you look at issue after issue, the American people are somewhat left of center. The problem is that democracy works to obstruct the will of the people at this point, which means not democracy. So what Department of Peace would be in all of these areas where you identify where is there incipient conflict. You nip it in the bud. Where do you think ISIS comes from? That we invaded Iraq. And anybody, if you've never seen the film, there was an incredible film. It was a documentary by Charles Ferguson called No End in Sight. Did anybody see that? Oh, it's the most tragic film. It's about the invasion of Iraq. And one of the things that's so painful about the movie is he did a very good job at not even, you don't even have to talk about whether or not you think we should have invaded it, but just the idiocy with which they behaved once they did. And you can totally see how something like the emergence of ISIS was inevitable. Because there was no psychological, emotional perspicacity. Let me tell you what to do if you want to create a problem. Insult an Arab man. Go into a country where you have all these people in this army who were open, and they were a very powerful army. They worked for Saddam Hussein, and they were open. You know what we did? We disbanded them. We disbanded them. They couldn't make a living. The insult, the damage, we disbanded them. Guess what they became? What person with the slightest knowledge that there's psychological issues? You know what I'm saying? So there are, when you talk about people who are peace builders, this is people who know that they are dealing with what are the psychological and the emotional elements that drive people's behavior. You know, when you look at something like the terrorist issue around the world, what is this if not anger turned into political force? Hatred turned into political force. So I come around and I talk about love turned into political force. Not that this is new, that's what Gandhi talked about, that's what Dr. King talked about. They can call them New Age nutcases. Now, why is it that if we know that hatred turned into a political force causes huge transformation in the way a society operates, why it should not be considered so odd to say that all emotion turned into a political force? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there are so many people who know this. What I just said in this room, this is like people get this. So when you say to people, if we really want to take violence, okay, take the guns in America. People say, what would you do about gun violence in the United States? Well, on one hand, I'm like any progressive Democrat. I think universal background checks, outlawing bump stocks, closing the loopholes, gun show loopholes, and boyfriend loopholes. I believe we should reinstate the ban on assault weapons. I think we should have mandatory buybacks. All of that. I want what every, left-wing Democrat wants. But that's still just treating the symptom. We must ask ourselves, why are we such a violent society?
Yep.
And we have to talk about all of the elements out of which statistically and sociologically we know if that child is that desperate by 12, you're gonna have a problem. It's statistically, you could look at the criminal studies that they have done in our prison system and where most of these children came from. Most abusers were abused. Most violent abusers were abused. You could look at little children. And so you take a child who's 8 years old, can't read, and might be hungry, and knows that he or she has there's no future for them. Do you know the anger in that child? So then you're all shocked, and where does all this violence come from? But we don't, this is like, what is what I just said if not just 21st century thinking? Nothing I just said is odd today, but it's odd for the way our government operates, because it's stuck, it needs a new operating system. Every century is a different operating system. The 20th century mindset was different than the 19th century, and the 21st century thinking is different than the 20th. And so in every area of American society, we've moved ahead. The American society, once again, this is what's so, American people are not the problem. And that's not the problem, we get it. You know, in American society, the average American gets, if it's not working on Wednesday, change it before Saturday. But when you have a system that is so driven by entrenched monetary forces, if it's not working, you just continue to do it again because it's working for them. So what the Department of Peace would do is to bring in the people who actually know how to solve these things, the people who know how to work with the formerly incarcerated, who know how to work with conflict resolution, restorative justice, all of these things, mental health services that actually create more peace. So it has to be internal and external. On the external, the gun laws that we were just talking about, that I think everything we can do within the purview of respect for the Second Amendment. But we have to dig deeper. We have to have root cause, and we have to deal with root cause as well as symptom. Right now, we have a president, actually, the president wanted to cut the State Department. The Republicans wouldn't even let him. The Republicans wouldn't let him. He wanted to basically get rid of everything that just had to do with reduction of violence against women. Most Americans don't really realize how much violence against women is used as a weapon of war and used as a weapon of control. Yeah. So this is not just about charity. It's about preventing wars. When we talk about helping women in other countries to have greater economic capacity, or women in corners of the United States. And to be honest, I've been in Iowa enough to know these problems aren't any less in Iowa. Look at what's happening here. Your farmers committing suicide. Your farmers in bankruptcy because of the corporate conglomeratization of agriculture. Look what it's done to farming. Look what it's done to the land. Look at the lack of crop diversification. Look what it's done to, how much more primal can you get than agriculture? How much more primal can you get? More to what humanity is about than our relationship to the land, the relationship to food, the relationship of agriculture. It's something that for decades and decades and decades in a place like Iowa was such a just can't get, these are the things that matter. These are values. People who for decades and their families and owned this land and took care of this food and knew the secrets. And we just trash it. We trash it. So that some companies can come in, people who've never walked this land, people who don't even know this state, can make more quick money. And you have a Secretary of Agriculture who says, if you're not big, get out. It goes back to what I said, it's the level of deep transgression. It's not just we don't believe in that, it's like it's a deep transgression against what matters most. I know I rambled on to something different, but you get my point about it. And that's violence, and that's another thing about violence. Our agricultural policies are violent. Our environmental policies are violent. Our criminal justice policies are violent. Some of our criminal justice policies are more violent than the violent offenses they seek to redress. Our foreign policy is violent. So we have to go much deeper than just asking what we're going to do about gun violence. Because we have to ask ourselves, why, will America, and this is one of the reasons I want a Department of Peace, are we willing to be nonviolent? That's what America needs to ask. Are we willing to be a nonviolent society? This is why we have some societies, their gun laws are no less strict than ours, but they're just not so violent. And we have to all ask ourselves, now, do I think there should be a law against it? Of course I don't think there should be a law against it, but do I think there should be healthy shaming of all the gratuitous violence, particularly violence against women on television and in movies? Do you know how many violent images the normal American school child has seen before the age of 10, just on television, during hours that they're awake? And as long as we're at it, talking about, withholding help to children is violence. The big tech companies have reported 45 million, last year alone, 45 million impressions on the internet reported by our tech companies of violent sexual abuse of children. Meanwhile, guess how much the budget is for our National Center of Missing and Exploited Children? $28.3 million. Now compare that to the billions I've been talking to you about today. By the way, I want to leave you one other, because this is your money. The U.S. Air Force has ordered 100 airplanes called the B-21 Raider. And the B-21 Raider is a bomber. We get that. Okay, we get that. We get the bombers drop bombs. Okay, we're not stupid. We get that. And we get that the Air Force is going to have bombers. Okay. But this is very interesting about the B-21 Raider. First of all, each one costs $560 million. And each one drops not only conventional bombs, but also nuclear bombs. Now, excuse me, maybe I'm just silly. Why do we need 100 airplanes that drop nuclear bombs? You drop 5 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. And you drop 10 of those, and it's over. So why is it that while 13 million children are hungry, well, our Center for Missing and Exploited Children is 28 million. Why is it that while 100,000 children are homeless in this country, why is it while tens of millions of people are burdened by this college loan debt that will not allow them to live their dreams and have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to put food on the table? Why is it, do you think, that we're spending $560 million each on 100 airplanes that drop nuclear bombs? Does anybody here think that's just to keep us safe?
Greed.
Industrial complex.
Greed.
And fear, keeping us in fear.
This is how bad it is. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. It's all gonna be okay. It's all gonna be okay on the other side of it. As soon as we get real, as soon as we get honest, as soon as we wake up, on the other side of this is the greatest chapter America has ever had. Thank you.